To look at, we're on the border of two municipalities here. We have Hanover across the street. We actually abut town of Morristown. A portion of Colgate, 5 acres or 6 acres, is actually in Morristown. So we need to reconcile this redevelopment plan with the master plans for both communities. And kind of the good thing is that the Morristown area is designated for residential, albeit single family, so this is a good transition as you go further back from the East Hanover, townhouse to single family, and also, as we know what's happening across the street in Hanover, that's sort of converted from office to more retail, and again, having the retail frontage along Hanover would be consistent. So we're consistent with the master plan policies of the adjoining communities. The rest of it, I don't think we need to spend time with them. This is just a requirement. The state plan, we're certainly not inconsistent with that. The county hasn't done a master plan updates forever. But then I think we cited some of the goals that we would be consistent with, including providing for a variety of housing types. Page 19, these are all requirements of the statute. No properties are going to be acquired. This is a non-condemnation redevelopment area designation. No condemnation. There's no relocation required, which is very often typical of multi-property redevelopment areas and plans. We talk about the actions on and off site that may be undertaken to implement the redevelopment. This is standard right out of statute. Page 20. Typical stuff that's in a redevelopment plan. They're subject to site plan review if and when the plan is approved. And on subdivision, we wanted to provide some flexibility so that if they wanted to subdivide various components of, like, for example, the retail commercial from the residential for either ownership or financing purposes, or we can envision that the affordable housing is going to be a separate component, maybe on a separate subdivision. We didn't want to start laying out minimums, so we provided flexibility subject to your approval, which again we can do in the context of a redevelopment plan, so long as there's access provided. We did the same thing actually when we did the Honeywell rezoning. A lot can be created without frontage on a public street, so long as there's access to that public street. So that we wanted to provide for. Page 20, the rest of that's boilerplate. 21, the duration of the plan, typically they're anywhere from 20 to 25 to 30 years. We put 30 years in the document. Hopefully, if any of all of us are around in 30 years, this will be built out. But if it weren't in 30 years, what would happen is it actually would revert back to the prior zoning. So I think 30 years should be enough time. Deviation requests, again, this is the sort of variance provision, and the same standards under the MLUL, Rick, just so that you know, in terms of either hardship or flexible C2 standards for a bulk variance. And the other thing which is important in a redevelopment plan, there's no provision, no allowance for, not this board, but the zoning board to grant a D variance. With a redevelopment plan, if anything rises to the level of a D variance, has to be amended by the governing body. So someone can't sort of circumvent the intent of a redevelopment plan going to the planning board by saying, oh, I need a floor area ratio variance, I'm gonna go and run and go to the zoning board. So it's not provided for here. If they needed they say, I want my FAR to be 22%, governing body have to amend the plan. I want to add a new permitted use, governing body amend the plan. I need a height, D6, governing body amend the plan. Density variance, D5, governing body amend the plan. So this is also typical.
I have one question. That 30 years, is that completion of the project should be done within 30 years? Wouldn't the town get done sooner?
It would.
So can you shrink that number? Or is that a standard?
It's pretty standard. Typically I see it between 20 and 30 years. One of the reasons that 30 years is in there is that if In certain redevelopment plans, there is provision for long-term tax abatement, and typically that's a 30-year period, so that kind of, and I'm not suggesting that we're going to have that here or not, the option's on the table. And kind of, we all kind of looked around the table and said, well, what should we put in? And someone said, yeah, put in 30 years, so. But it's, I think the intent is that, you know, the redeveloper is going to build it a lot sooner than that.
I don't think anybody's going to want it to take longer either.
There's a procedure and a fee requirement for amending the plan. And then the last section is just a requirement out of statute. You just have to rehash that you met all the requirements on page 22, all the requirements that are outlined in the redevelopment statute. And then the conceptual illustrations and photo examples to, again, provide guidance with regard to the look, the design, the materials on both the residential and the retail commercial component. So that's sort of a summary of the plan.
And taking a step back, I did look at the requirements in the TH6 zone on page 9. And as I look at it, it's kind of a hybrid between the TH6 and TH4. We defined the standard setbacks from the different facades of the building more in the TH4 zone. So I give you the standards as a comparison for both, but I'm also going to read going back to the TH6 zone just to give you an idea as to how different it was, because it was written a lot different back when TH6 was drafted, you know, in say 30 or so years ago. But they talk about in the TH6 zone, front and rear yards, each individual lot shall have a front and rear yard. No such yard shall be less than 20 feet as measured from an interior service or private road. 40 feet is measured from a major arterial or municipal county road. Average front and rear yards for individual lots. The track shall not be less than 25 feet. So there's standards, you know, we're saying 25, 20 in that particular section there. Talks about a side yard. There should be a side yard not less than 10 feet in each row, which is a pretty low standard. Talks about siting. Each group of dwelling units shall not be less than 50 feet from any tract boundary line, except where the rear yard of an individual lot abuts the rear yard of a property adjacent to the tract. This setback can be reduced to 35 feet. And then it talks about no group of dwelling units within the tract shall be closer to 30 feet to another group of dwelling units. So I'd say those are the numbers in the TH6 zone that kind of relate to this next comparison. I mean, as you're looking on page 9, you'll see that we've got the front-to-front facade of 75 feet. You know, that's greater, you know, if 50 feet was what was discussed in the TH6 zone. When I go to TH4, that 75-foot setback is the same. So the front facade, 75 feet. In the TH4 zone, we use 75 feet. When I go to TH4 and do a comparison, what we've got in this ordinance is the front facade to end facade of 65 feet. And in the TH4 zone, we actually use 50 feet. So this standard actually puts more distance between the front to end facade of the building. On rear facade to rear facade in this ordinance, in this redevelopment plan, we've got 50 feet. Under TH4, it was 50 feet. In the rear facade to end facade, the redevelopment plan uses 50 feet. And in the TH4, it was 60 feet, so TH4 had an extra 10 feet in that particular distance from rear to end facade. End facade to end facade in the redevelopment plan, 25 feet. TH4 had 30 feet as a comparison. So as I mentioned, it's kind of a hybrid between TH6 and TH4, but it's a little bit closer to the TH4 standards.
Right. Even though the density is...
Which are more onerous, actually.
Right, so that's good.
Yeah.
That's what I was hoping for.